No one cares about the fact that you have $100,000 in your bank account. What you should care about is the lifestyle and the things that you want to do with those resources. A tumor was growing inside of my 9th vertebrae, and it was like days away from attaching to my spinal cord. And if it had attached itself to my spinal cord, I would have probably been paralyzed from the waist down. So it forced me to look a little bit deeper around like, what does it look like to truly build something that can run without you?
78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck.
If it's costing you $4,000 a month to maintain your existing lifestyle, and you're making that exact amount of money or less, and you're even having to subsidize with credit, like that's a recipe for disaster.
What is that process of like actually getting good with your money?
The first one is...
Okay, before we get into the episode, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. When you subscribe to the channel, it makes this show an even better experience. Here's how. It helps us scale our production, the guests, bring on the right partners. So if you enjoy this content, you enjoy the stories and the guests and everything that we do, then please subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and on to the show. You're a contributor on Forbes. Mm-hmm. And so I took this from Forbes. They say, George is an award-winning wealth advisor who helps people build financial independence faster through an innovative approach to financial planning and wealth building. And so here's where I want to begin, because I think for the everyday person, we hear this term like wealth advisor.
Yeah.
And so I want to start here. What is a wealth advisor, and what is it that you do?
For sure. Well, I'll start with this quote. Riches is measured in money. Wealth is measured in time. And for me, what a wealth advisor is someone who is helping you align your money with your values so that you can ultimately live the life that you want by leveraging investments, right, to be able to take care of your lifestyle, whether it's places you want to travel, people you want to help, things you want to do, whatever the case may be. You now, instead of having to trade your time and your active income for that, you now have a pool of resources from investments that can cover that lifestyle so that most of your time is spent doing the things that you want to do, right? So I guess that kind of answered the question to a degree. So what I do in that is I'm understanding what people really want at the end of the day. I think that's what a wealth advisor is. Like, what do you really want out of life, and how can we use the tools, i.e. money, to help you do more of that? Because oftentimes, you know, when we're not centered around what's important to us and what matters, we tend to just use money, you know, in haphazard ways, right? It's like, oh, we're working a job that we don't necessarily enjoy, or our businesses, you know, got us exhausted and tired. So we're using money as an escape from a temporary escape from the life that we have, versus saying, how can I use money as a tool to buy freedom and buy back my time to give me more of the life that I want?
You know what, it came to mind as I was listening to you. It's the difference between working for money versus making the money work for you.
100%.
Which is like, it's a difficult balance to achieve that, to get 100%. To that point. Okay, here's where I want to go next. I want to start with like the early context. Okay. I know from our conversations that we've had, even in like your family and all of that, you're like the money guy.
Yeah.
And so I just want to understand where that started. Like, what was your relationship with money at an early age?
Yeah. So I remember like it was yesterday. I wanted the first PlayStation, right? Back then it wasn't PlayStation 1, it was just PlayStation, right? So I'm aging myself a little bit. But I asked my mom at the beginning of the year. I was like, hey, Mom, I want the PlayStation. It's the only thing I really want for Christmas. And she never said no, right? She never said no. She's like, okay, son, we'll see what we can do. So fast forward to Christmas, I look under the tree and there's a box. At least in my mind at that time, I was like, man, that's shaped. That's gotta be a PlayStation, right? And I opened the box on Christmas. And ultimately it's a box of tube socks, right? One with the two little lines at the top of the sock, right? I think they were red. And I was a little bit discouraged. I was a little bit defeated because I really had my heart set on that PlayStation. So that at an early age, that might've been 5th grade or something, that sparked this idea that if you want something in this life, you have to go and get it, right? So started doing little odd jobs, you know, cutting grass, helping my uncle wash cars. And I never really spent the money. I became what I now know the term to be frugal. I just held on to the money from anything that I would do. And at some point, it became known in my family, and they were just like, and they would ask me to borrow money. And I mind you, I'm in elementary school. I didn't know the term interest at the time, but just logically, it was like, okay, if I'm gonna give you $70, I should probably get more back than 70 whenever you pay me back. And so I was like the loan shark in elementary school, if you will, to my family members. But ultimately, again, that initial experience just sparked the fact that I felt like I was able to understand that not having money prevented you from doing things you wanted to do, right? So it made me a good steward of money early on. I did have some run-ins where I kind of like, all right, well, now I'm going to spend the money how I want to spend it. And some funny stories I can share. I'll share one of them. I remember like it was my first like official job. I think I was 15 and a half. I was working at a furniture store. I don't think I've ever told this story publicly. This furniture store called Lazy Boy. And I remember it ever like it was yesterday. I got paid $162.50 every 2 weeks. And with that amount, 1 week I could go buy some clothes and the next week I could go buy some shoes. Because I had been this frugal kid for so long. I was like, oh, I got a job now. I'm in high school. Now I'm going to start treating myself. And every week, every like clockwork, I would go buy, or every other week, I would buy clothes 1 week and the shoes to match it the next week. And then I think one time I came home and asked my mom for lunch money and she was like, can you just get paid? I was like, well, yeah, I mean, but lunch, that's kind of your job. Like, you give me the lunch money. And she's like, no, like, you just made money and you mean to tell me you spent so much of it that you couldn't feed yourself. Like, that's not a smart thing to do. So she kind of reeled me back in and reminded me that you can spend, you can do the things you want to do, but you still have to make sure that you can take care of your basic necessities. But long story short, ultimately, these experiences kind of just shaped the lens that I looked through the world when it came to money. My mom got remarried, and she knew I'd always been pretty good with money, and she asked me to help them put a cash flow plan together. I was able to put that together. I had a friend that was interning for a financial services firm, asked him, is what I put together pretty good? And he told me it actually was better than what they do, right? And so it's, at that point, it still didn't spark my interest to try to start a career path in the industry. I only ever wanted to learn about money so that I could help my family and, of course, help myself. But those are some of the early experiences that just made me understand the importance of money, wanted to make sure I had it as a resource so that nobody could tell me no.
Yeah. Okay, nice. You spoke about, wanting to help your family. Like that was like a core motivation. And it's interesting when we're kids because I think as we're children, we like slowly start to become aware of different things. So to begin with, you're not even fully cognizant of like money or if your family has more money than the people next door or like the other kid at school. But then slowly you start to pick up on these things. I remember going to school and it's like, when I was growing up, it was like the Nintendo DS. And like certain kids, they coming back from Christmas holidays, they got like the latest one. And you're like a few models behind, or you're using like, I was using my older brother's like old Game Boy or something. And so these little things start to kind of become clear to you. I'm just curious, what was like the family dynamic growing up? Like what were some of those small signs to you at an early point that you were like, we ain't really necessarily got it like how, I don't know, like the richer kids or people in the neighborhood?
Yeah, I would say there's a few examples, right? I think one of the easiest ones is like, back then, I don't know if kids are doing it now because the world's so weird, but like you would spend a night at your friend's house, you have a sleepover, right? So when I would go to my friend's house to sleep over, at least one of them I can remember in particular, I was like, there's a lot of space here. First and foremost, I was like, things are pretty nice here. And it felt different. I could tell that they had something different that we didn't have, right? And I can kind of just see like, I don't know, the energy didn't seem as like anxious or like, it just seemed like a calm place to be. And I associated that with the fact that maybe they have something that we don't have beyond the space, right? And ultimately, to your point, I know it to be dollars and cents, maybe not by definition, but I felt like, the resources that they had were more abundant than we had, right? So that became a seed that got sown like, okay, like you can live a little different, live a little more comfortably when you have more resources. So I think those are some instances, like situations like that. I remember also growing up playing sports. There was this one kid back then, he used to get on my nerves because like his mom would buy him 2 pairs of shoes, one just to take pictures in for the team photos, and then one that he could, play the actual sport with. And I was just like, who buys their kid 2 pairs of shoes? One just he can just take pictures in and style and profile in, and then one that he can actually play in. So I was like, who has the resources for that? We sure don't. So that was something. And I think the one that really did it for me was So I remember we had to put our school clothes on layaway at one point, right? For those who don't know what layaway is, it's when you go to the store, you basically pick out all the stuff you want, you give it to the store and say, and you start basically paying it off, right, incrementally, and then once you pay it off, you can get the clothes, right? So like the beginning of summer, we go put stuff on layaway, and then by the end of summer before school starts, we can pick it up. So I was so proud, I was so happy. I had this outfit. It was, you might not remember, this might be a little bit young, but you remember like the carpenter jeans that had like the little hook on the side. It was like, I think they were like Tommy Hilfiger, but
Okay.
as a Tommy Hilfiger outfit, I had this one shirt, the jeans to match, and these Nikes that I thought were relatively neutral, right? Because I knew that I didn't have that many outfits and I had to wear a lot of stuff with it. So I went to school, I was all proud. This might have been the third time I wore the outfit. And this young lady, who shall remain nameless, she was like, dang, you love that outfit, don't you? And it just hurt my heart. So because I really did love the outfit, but I knew what she was saying. She's basically saying, I'm tired of seeing the outfit. But what she didn't know is she turned me into a fashion rebel. Because at that point, I was like, okay, cool. When I get my money up, y'all gonna remember my name. Y'all gonna remember that like George can put it together when it comes to fashion. But it's like moments like that, I just realized, well, man, maybe people, they don't have to put their clothes on layaway, or they have enough outfits to where they're not repeating the same thing so frequently. And it just sows seeds in you to know that there's more out there. Yes, kids can be cruel and can, tease you, but it just sows seeds to let you know that maybe there's a little bit more to life, and you just have to figure it out and get the resources to be able to enjoy it.
Yeah. One of the things I think is interesting, and I've heard people speak about this, is wealthy people and people that are used to having money, there's certain habits, mindsets that they've developed, which almost, it keeps the rich rich. And on the other spectrum of things, I think for people where there's like a scarcity of money, there's like this scarcity mindset that builds that even when you get money, it like self-sabotages or you do certain things. I'm curious because it seemed at a pretty early point, your mom was teaching you like money lessons almost.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, what did you observe from her? Like, what was her relationship with money? Like, what was her kind of mindset to it?
Yeah, it's like, even though, like, there were situations that arose or circumstances that came about throughout, our childhood, I felt like she definitely did the best with what she had, right? She's a single mom for the most part. My dad was back in Ghana at the time. And what she taught me, she taught me a lot about priorities, I would say, when it came to money. Because while she was saying no to certain things, right, I can never remember a situation where we didn't have a roof over our head, or we didn't have a car, or we didn't have the necessities. So she taught me a lot about, while there might be some luxuries and extras that you sometimes have to say no to, right, the importance of prioritizing the fundamentals, right, so that you can always have a roof over your head, you can always have food on the table and things of that nature. So she taught me to be a good steward over what you have, regardless of how much it is, being a good steward over what you have. That's definitely a lesson I got from her. And what I also say, right, at the end of the day, like, sometimes you learn lessons from what you don't have, right? So I do remember when she got laid off from a job and we were living in a house and that we were all so proud of, and we ultimately had to move out of that house, right? And had to move in with a family friend just a little bit before I went to college. And so those types of memories on the other side of it taught you, like, I don't want to be in a situation where I don't have that emergency fund or have the resources that if life throws me a curveball, that I'm unable to adapt, and it just completely shakes up my entire lifestyle. But ultimately, I think that she was a good steward over what she had. If she had more, she would have been able to do more. But she always took care of home, and with what we had, made sure that we felt provided for.
Yeah, I'm curious because it seems that you mentioned like being frugal. I know even when we've spoken, it seems that from like a money standpoint, you took the responsibility for that at a pretty early stage.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting, is the mindset of someone who, when they're pretty young, maybe they're 14, 15 years old, they're already thinking like, it's kind of my job to elevate my family from this financial situation. Like it's unique, right?
Yeah.
And so why do you think that is? Why is it that you felt like George has to do it. Like, it's on me to do it.
Yeah.
Why did you feel that responsibility? Okay, so quick break. One of the things that I've learned from doing this episode is the importance and the impact of your environment. Who are the people around you? Your network is your net worth. And so the sponsor of today's episode is going to help you up level the network and the people around you. So the sponsor of today's episode is Wealth Weekend. This is a conference from July 26th to July 28th. It's being held in Atlanta. And it's actually the guest. So George Acheampong and his business partner, Carter Cofield, are putting on this event that features a number of 7-figure entrepreneurs explaining exactly how they built their business. And when I was talking to George about it, one of the things that he really pushed was the networking piece. The ability to not only listen to these people, but also get to meet them and get to meet other like-minded people that are trying to build successful businesses and overall successful lives from themselves. Even just looking at some of the expertise of the speakers, you have top content creators, you have personal finance experts, you have people that understand the stock market and investing, real estate. There's literally so many different fields. And so if you're looking to take your income, your network to a whole nother level, this is definitely something that you should check out. And it gets even better because I've hooked you guys up. When you use the link in the description and you use the code WEALTH, you will get 20% off your event ticket. So go to the link in the description, use that code WEALTH, and you'll get 20% off your ticket. Thank me later. It's going to be an incredible weekend in Atlanta. And let's get back to the show.
I mean, even though I was young, I was a young man, right? And I feel like part of it felt innate, right? Like I'm the man of the house at that time. And you know, when you start to see things and you observe things and gaps, it's just like, just for me at least, it was innate to want to fill those gaps, right? It's like you have a mom, you love her, you know she's doing everything you can. You don't want to see her struggle. You don't want to see her stretch herself unnecessarily. And for whatever reason, instead of me taking whatever financial resources I was able to accumulate at a young age and wanting to buy Power Rangers and toys, I was just like, let me hold on to this because my family might need it. Let me hold on to it because I'm noticing things that we need. And she's not asking me to do it, but I have the desire to do it. I wish I could tell you I knew where that came from. Maybe that's, I don't know, again, innate or just something God divinely downloaded in me. But for me, it seemed very just fundamental. Like, you're the young man of the house. Your mom needs help, whether she's saying it or not. What are you going to do to help? Right? Because she definitely never asked. Right? She definitely never said, hey, I know you just cut that person's lawn or you just helped your uncle wash cars. Like, you know, mom needs some money. She never asked. I just saw opportunities to help and it just felt innate to do so.
Yeah. I remember for me growing up, there were certain moments that I remember quite vividly. Because the first 10 years of my life, I lived with my mom and my older brother. And my mom used to basically work like round the clock to support us. And I remember certain moments vividly, seeing her in the kitchen, like different things or like just handling bills and being stressed about different things where I could see that she was struggling.
Yeah.
I'm curious from your perspective, is there a story, is there an experience where like it just comes to mind of like you just saw that your mom was in a tough spot?
Yeah. Yeah, so I remember I mentioned my mom had got laid off, right? And it's like Murphy's Law. If it can't happen, it will happen. So she got laid off. We were living in a pretty new house that we had just moved into, it seemed like maybe a year ago. Had my own room. You know, that's the big thing when you're a kid. I got my own room and I can do what I want to do with it. And she got laid off, right? So she was making things work, to your point, trying to move some things around. I could see that she was struggling with the bills and it was already hard enough losing your primary source of income. But and on top of that, the only car that we had blew a head gasket, right? Which was a pretty expensive thing to get fixed. And so now she goes from being laid off to now our car like not being functioning. And then I think my uncle at the time had like a really old car. You know, the cars like where like the ceiling like is peeling down, like really old car that he let us use. And I could just feel and see the frustration that we were experiencing, right? And she was just fighting, right? She was trying to do everything she could to keep it together. I think at this point, my sister might have went to college already. So it was just me and her in the house. But I just remember it being a very, very tough season. And again, that ultimately leading us to having to move in with a family friend. But yeah, I just remember that being really, really tough. Having to give up, your own space, what you consider to be your safe space, your safe haven, and us not really talking about the nuance of why it was happening, but more so like, this is what we got to do. And I know she probably didn't want to talk about it because it'd been even more painful to, just recount the reality, right, in real time. It's just like, in telling me like, hey son, this is what's going on. And like it was just one of those things where, hey, things are shifting and we got to move in with the family friend. We didn't really have a discussion about, not that she owed me a discussion per se, but I think that was a time where I really felt like, and it was right before I went to college, I was like, okay, I don't want my mom to have to feel like this. I don't want to feel like this. What can I do to put us in a situation where we never have to feel this way again? And I think that was probably the final straw in me, like that's making a determining factor that I got to figure this out for our family.
Yeah. I resonate with that so much. It's like, and it's not even the material things
Right.
that is the biggest pain point. It's to me, it was always the loss of independence.
Yes.
Like feeling like I need to rely on this person or this thing that's outside of my control.
Right.
My life hinges on that. It's just like, you just feel powerless.
Yeah, 100%.
And it hurts. Like that's what hurts about it. Okay, that makes sense. So that was the fuel. I guess coming out of that then, you start getting into your career, you start making money. It's interesting the way the course that like life takes, right?
Yeah.
Because you especially as a man, like you start making money, and then there's like, you think you just want the money, and then there's like a bunch of things that even come with that. I'm curious, you remember your first experience of like really feeling like there was like a healthy sum of money in your account? Like, do you remember that?
Yeah, so I started my entrepreneur journey pretty early. I was 23, 24, and I was working with this financial services firm as a kind of independent contractor. So I was in business for myself, but not by myself. But I was like, 100% commission. And I remember I had been there for a few months, and I think I had got a check for like $18,000. And at that time, man, that was life-changing money, right? $18,000. I mean, I'd take a check for $18,000 today too. But at the time, that was just like life-changing money. And I remember for whatever reason, who they banked with, we had to cash the check. Like they couldn't direct deposit. I had to like go to the bank, cash the check, and then to deposit the money in my bank. And I ended up doing it like at the end of the day. So I didn't have enough time to get back to my bank. So I'm sitting here with this like wad of cash and all these $100 bills. I'm young. I'm 23 years old. I'm just like, man, I made it, right? And I remember that being a moment where I felt like, man, like I think that I'm gonna be able to figure this thing out. And I remember making early personal, I didn't necessarily share them out loud, but early personal commitments, like one day I'm gonna retire my mom. I never told her, right? I was like, but she doesn't know yet. One day I'm gonna retire my mom. And this is, again, at this point, probably a decade-ish before it happened, because I did it in 2022. Yeah, when I retired my mom. And God is funny, because my mom, I once it got closer, I was like, I want to retire her before like traditional retirement age, which is 65. Or I was like, I don't know how soon. I was like, well, I want it to be before. So she had her 60th birthday, and like a week later, she got laid off from her job. And God was like, what you gonna do? He said, she didn't know that you made this promise to yourself, but like, now's your chance. And so I had the opportunity to have a conversation with her and say, I know you're kind of figuring out what your next steps are gonna be, if you're gonna go back to work or find something new, but I want you to know that you don't have to. And that was probably one of my proudest moments of knowing that my mom can finally take it easy and be provided for.
Yeah. You remember her reaction?
Just gratitude. I think my family dynamic is, in the spectrum of love language, we're very acts of service, in the sense that we show our love by showing up and doing things. We growing up, it wasn't a lot of like, I love you and hugs and kisses and that kind of thing, which I'm unlearning, because my wife is the polar opposite, and she like is all about that. And then so we're balancing that with our 2-year-old son. But I say that to say, what she didn't say with her words, she demonstrated with her actions of how appreciative she was of me being able to do that. And so she was just very grateful that I was in the position and had the financial wherewithal to even know that it was possible to make it happen for her. But definitely an immense amount of gratitude. She's so proud of, the things I'm able to do. She's like all over my social media to the point where I'm like, Mom, you gotta relax a little bit. Like somebody tries to troll me in the comments. She's like, oh, like she's definitely on it. So, but she shows up with her actions, but she's just really, really grateful that she can, take it easy and spend time with my son and be this super Gigi as he calls her. But yeah, it's a great feeling for sure.
Yeah. Just to have like the choices in your life. I think that's what we're all trying to get to, where you have optionality. You're not doing things because you have to do it. It's actually a choice.
Mm-hmm.
I want to rewind a little bit to, so you get this $18,000 check.
Yeah.
I'm curious from a mindset level, right? Because I think, especially when you come from an environment where money wasn't plentiful or abundant, and then suddenly that person gets money, it's like, were you ready for it?
No.
Explain that.
I was actually telling Carter about this story not too long ago. So it's funny because like, you're still like, even if you're a financial advisor or you come from an environment where you didn't have money, you want to like be a good steward over it, you're still human at the end of the day and a young man at the end of the day. So I'm 23 years old. I get this $18,000 in cash at the time when I had it. And I was not ready for it. I remember like, I was only like a year removed from college. I still had some friends of mine that lived in the same town that I went to school. And I remember like going up there for like one of the parties and like just being reckless. Like I was like giving out, I was like, hey, look, go buy yourself a bottle. Like, you look there, like I was just reckless, buying shots for everybody. Definitely wasn't ready for it. Again, something else I don't share that publicly, but it actually led to me expediting getting that energy out of my system because I actually end up, I think it was maybe like 6 months after that first, because the checks kept coming, but 6 months after that first time, I actually ended up getting a DUI. Just because I started to develop this like invincible armor. Like I'm making money now. Nobody can stop me. I can do what I want to do. And it's just one thing led to another. And I end up like getting a DUI, and it just really sat me down like, George, wait, like you're only doing this to change the trajectory of your family's dynamic. But the road that you're on right now, like you're actually going to go off course and make it worse. So I'm really glad that happened actually, because had I kept trending in the direction of just like feeling like I was on top of the world and I can do what I wanted to do, I don't know where I would have ended up. So yeah, I was not ready to answer your question. I was not ready at all.
I'm curious, when you think about the position you're in now, where like not only are you making money yourself, but you're advising people on how to manage their money. What is the biggest difference between the George at, 24, who got the money and blew it, from a mindset perspective? What was the biggest difference between that person and then you now?
I think the biggest difference is my value system, right? Like right now, I value time freedom. I value being so far from the edge that I can't even see the cliff, meaning like, I never want to be in a situation where it's like, man, like because of my spending habits, like now I'm anxious about money again, right? Like the best part about having money is not having to think about it. Like think about that. Like that you're financially secure when you're actually not having to think about money. Everything's on auto draft. The money's there. Like money's the least of your concerns, right? And so for me, what shifted was I didn't want to be in this state of grind and hustle forever, right? I wanted to be able to be in a place where my money could do most of the work, so they gave me that optionality, right? And and more importantly, because I'm advising people, I want to be in alignment, right? I don't want to like, it's like if you wouldn't trust a personal trainer who was 50 pounds overweight. It's like, bro, like you're not drinking your own Kool-Aid, right? So I wanted to lead from the front, because it gives you a heightened level of conviction when you know the power of doing things the right way or the way that you're advising. So for me, it just became like, I know I had to recenter my why, recenter my values on why I'm doing this and what the purpose is. And in doing so, it just shifted the way I handle myself, right? Because I never wanted a scenario where anyone could call me out on like not being authentic, right? Like, how are you advising and managing other people's money, but you're not doing the things that you're advising on? So I think that's what shifted it for me.
Yeah. You know what? I want to talk about unexpected events. And I know that in your life, there was like one huge event which was completely unexpected. And so let me just read, because you wrote an article on this. Let me read out the first paragraph and get your sense of it. You said, December 24th of 2015, the doctor walked into my hospital room and told me that I had a giant cell tumor of the thoracic spine. I was partially relieved, finally knowing what was wrong with me after a year of misdiagnosis, but equally scared at the same time. Can you kind of just give the context? Like, what was that whole situation? What was happening?
Yeah. So I had just gotten married September 27th of 2015. Earlier that year, I was experiencing this excruciating back pain. And I'm pretty active at the gym, and I was, even younger than I am now then. So I thought maybe I tweaked something, I strained something, I pulled something. So I did the typical stuff, went to get a massage, went to the chiropractor, things of that nature, and even went to the doctor to figure out what was going on. But ultimately didn't really get any meaningful diagnosis, and the pain just continued to persist. So then after I get married later that year, I remember like going on our honeymoon and just really feeling like out of it, like in a lot of pain. And then shortly thereafter, like it got to the point where like I couldn't even really leave the house. Like that's how much pain I was in. Couldn't stand up straight, in excruciating pain. Ultimately, I finally got diagnosed properly, and the doctor told me that, well, this is how I found out. She asked me, she was like, "Did you get ejected from a car? Or were you in a bad car accident?" I'm saying, "Well, I don't think that's something someone would forget or they would know." I was like, "No, I didn't get ejected from a car." She said, "Well, do you have any blunt trauma to your back recently?" I was like, "No." So then they did like another scan, and they were able to see that a tumor was growing inside of my ninth vertebrae, and it fractured my spine, and it was like days away from attaching to my spinal cord. And if it had attached itself to my spinal cord, I would have probably been paralyzed from the waist down, right? So now, mind you, I had been married all of 60 days at this point when I'm getting this news. And so like now my wife is having to live out the vows for sickness and in health, like very, very early on. Without giving too much detail, things that you would think you'd have to do at maybe like 65 or 70 as a married couple, things that we had to deal with within 60 days, first 60 days, right? And it's just a very unique experience. And through that journey, because I was an entrepreneur at that time, it really helped me like just realize like, man, like anything can happen at any time. Like this is so unexpected, right? Like, and I had to really think about like, how can I build something that doesn't require me to run it? Because what if I did get paralyzed from the waist down, right? Like this business, all these dreams that I have for running and growing this business, it would look completely different. It's not to say that it would be impossible, but it certainly would look different than I envisioned it. So it forced me to look a little bit deeper around like, what does it look like to truly build something that can run without you, or have other options independent of that, so that if something does happen to your main business, that you'll be okay. And it really helped me double down on the belief system of the importance of the work that I did, right? It really helped me understand that financial planning and like just building wealth is a lot like the human body, right? The place in which you experience pain is rarely ever the source of it, right? Like going back to that financial trauma, right? It's like you're spending money in this way. We can't just look at your bank account and say, "Oh, well, stop spending," right? That'll fix your problem. That is a derivative of something deeper, right? If you have a pain in your knee, it might be because of a tight hamstring, right? And so it helped me realize that you can't really compartmentalize your financial situation. It's all connected, right? And it really helped me just reimagine the way that I serve my clients. so that could help me get the best results. And again, most importantly, it helped me reimagine how I needed to approach business and investing so that when, not if, something happens to you, your family or your loved ones or your clients or employees aren't feeling the impact of you not being able to be the one that can run it.
Mm. You know, I want to, obviously there's like the business and the financial outcomes of it all. I'm curious to get into like how you were feeling at the time. And the reason why I say that is I feel like we've all had that experience where you, I don't know, you even have like some niggling injury, or you wake up, you're like, oh no, it's a bit stiff, or I don't know, you just, there's something not right. And you kind of, I think for 99.999% of the time, it's nothing.
Yeah.
You wake up the next day, it's fine.
Right.
And so I just think about the experience of what you said. It kind of hit me of like, in a few days that tumor could have attached to your spine and you could have been paralyzed. Like just the small margins of that.
Right.
To come from such an event which just, it didn't seem like a big deal. It seemed so minor. And so I'm curious, like when you're sitting with the doctor, like in that medical room, and he says that, like where is your mind even going?
Yeah. Taking me back. Where my mind is going is, initially, like, why me, right? Like one of the most frustrating experiences through that process, even to this day, right, is like, you almost look at people and you feel like, again, you don't know the context of the backstory, but you feel like they're squandering their health, right? It's like they're voluntarily eating unhealthy. They're voluntarily not going to the gym. And it's like, I was trying to do all the right things and was dealt a hand that seems so unfair, right? It's like I was trying to work out, I was trying to eat healthy, trying to do all the right things. Why is this happening to me? That's like the kind of the default initial thought. Other than that, it was just like trying not to overthink or create scenarios of what this was going to mean for my life going forward. Right? Because I didn't know, quite frankly, right? I didn't know how I was going to feel after I had this surgery, right? Because here's the craziest thing he told me. He was like, well, we got two choices, right? Well, if we don't perform the surgery that I'm going to recommend, you're all but guaranteed to be paralyzed from the waist down, right? Because the tumor is going to attach itself to your spinal cord and blah, 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 right? Or we can have the surgery, but based upon where we have to have the surgery, there is no guarantee that you won't be paralyzed, but it's the only option to not, outside of like not doing the surgery. I was like, wait, so you mean to tell me like, I got to have this 6-hour surgery where you're going to split my back down the middle. You're going to take out a part of my spine forever. You're going to replace it with titanium metal rods and screws that are still there to this day as we have this conversation. And there's still no guarantee that like there's still no guarantee that I might not be paralyzed from the waist down, but that's my only option. So it was just, I don't think I had a lot of space to even process anything other than making that decision, right? I was like, well, it sounds like my only choice is to have this surgery. And even though it's as scary as it sounds, like I know for sure I don't want to give myself the option to be guaranteed to be paralyzed. And so that's all I could really think about that time. Once I had the surgery, my thought shifted to just like, is my life ever going to be the same, right? I was for the longest time chasing the 2014 version of George, the George that he could run and there'd be no pain, the George that could wake up and he feels no pain. And it created a lot of frustration because I was chasing something that would never come, right? Like that version of George is inherently gone because I had the surgery, I had the metal rods and screws in my back, and I'll never see him again, right? So what I had to do is reframe and create a new normal and say, okay, well, a medical dictionary is, I don't know how long this is, like 10,000 pages or something like that. And there's probably 2 sentences of that 10,000 page book that reflect my current situation. But there's 9,999 other pages of things that I could be experiencing that I'm not experiencing, right? So it was a reframing of a perspective of like, yes, it sucks, but ultimately I get to walk out of this hospital. And I remember it was like Christmas Eve or something like that when I got the original diagnosis. And the hospital was filled to the brim, 7 floors. Every room had somebody in it. And I had this realization like, wow, I'm walking out, but some people won't, right? Some people, this is the last place they'll be. And so I could focus on the circumstance and the unfortunate nature of what I was experiencing, or I could focus on all the things that I still got to do and the life that I still got to live, despite it maybe not looking like I thought it was going to look.
You know, our feelings, they oscillate, they like vary, you know? We go through like emotional ups and downs.
Yeah.
This is a lot more minor than what you just shared. But when I was 19 years old, I was in my second year of university, and I did a study abroad in Canada. It was almost my dream growing up to go to a North American university growing up in the UK. And 4 weeks in, I tear my Achilles tendon, can't walk for like 6 months. And I remember feeling this like, similar to kind of what you described, like, why me?
Right.
An Achilles tear for someone at 19, like doesn't make, and I remember just all of these like thoughts running in my mind, like this wasn't meant to happen. You have like this story that's built of like how your life was meant to go. Then it feels like you were starting to get the things you wanted and then ripped away.
Right.
And so back to what I said before, like feelings oscillate. I think I kind of reached a certain level of peace with that. But then every now and then, right, you're like, great, I'm not as explosive as I was. When I was 18, I used to like play basketball or football, and I used to be fast. Now it doesn't explode the same way. Or like a couple weeks ago, I went on like a 3-mile run in New York. And then a few days later, it's like my left leg, which is where the Achilles tear is, it's like sore. Like I get injured more easily. And so you have, even though you've kind of mentally, you've gone past that situation, you think you've dealt with it, you still have these moments where you're like, why did that have to happen to me?
It's like the residual reminder, right? Of like, it didn't used to be like this. And now I need you do something that reminds you of it. And I tweeted something about this, or at least just reminded me of something I tweeted about recently. And it was like, let's be honest, right? You're not doing everything you can to get the desired result that you want in your life. Maybe it's because it's taking more effort than you thought it would, or than it used to take you to achieve the same outcome, right? So the real frustration might be like, I used to be able to do this and it was so much easier. It doesn't mean I can't do it now. It's just that you can't erase the memory of there was a time in life where it wasn't this hard to do the same exact thing, right? And so when you think about any goal in life, like that I think that's true for all things. It's like, man, there was a time where, you know, stuff was less expensive, or I had less expenses and I was single, or whatever the dynamic is, and it just didn't seem as hard to navigate this, right? But if you still want the outcome, right, it's like, yeah, it might be harder than it was then. It might be taking more effort, but are we being honest about the fact that we're not doing everything we can to get that result, right? No one ever said it would be comfortable or pleasurable. Like one of my mentors told me this quote. He said, successful people like pleasurable outcomes. Unsuccessful people like pleasurable methods, right? Like,
it's good.
Unsuccessful people want it to feel like, oh, like this doesn't feel, where in the rule book did it say like, oh, you're going to achieve this massive success and along the way, it's going to feel amazing, right? Like you have to be more attracted to what you gain, right? Which we spoke about earlier, in the outcome than the experience and the process to get it. And for everybody, it's going to look a little bit different. We all have varying levels of circumstance. You look at some of the richest people in the world and their families are plagued with health issues, right? It's like, I can give them all the medical treatment in the world, but like, man, why can't I have everything I could ever want financially, but I don't feel like I can enjoy it the way I want because my sibling has some type of medical issue or whatever the case may be, or my spouse, right? Or you have a great family dynamic and you have a loving family and everybody's happy, but you're financially strapped, right? You have the beautiful picture perfect family, but the financial. So it's like everybody's gonna have something. You just have to understand what your something is, and in spite of that circumstance or that burden, make a decision about your pursuit regardless.
I think there's people listening who every day when they wake up, that's like the first thought.
Right.
How am I going to make more money? How am I going to pay for this? Oh my God, the car just broke down. How am I going to... All of that. They feel like underwater. And I felt like that at certain points. Like you just feel almost overwhelmed. And so for the person that's they're working their job, they're just grinding just to stay like level, just to keep
Yeah.
their head kind of above water.
Right.
What is that process of like actually getting smart, getting good with your money? Because one of the things that I hear people say like, oh, I'm just not that good with money. Just not my thing.
Yeah.
People just kind of ignore it. Like I just don't really look in the account.
Right.
I've done that at certain points.
Yeah.
I just want to look into my account.
Right.
Just leave it to the side. So what is that process where someone can actually become more aware
Yeah.
and start to build the habits where they're actually good with money?
Yeah. You said the first one, right? The first one is you have to be massively aware. And the way that you have to be massively aware is you have to face your current reality, right? You have to dig in, log into your online banking, pull up your credit score, pull up all your debts and liabilities, and do an honest assessment on where you are, right? Because oftentimes people don't have that clarity, right? They're just kind of going through the motions. It's like, ooh, there's enough money to transfer to get the rent paid, and I'll worry about the next bill when the next bill comes, right? It's like, how much money is coming in? How much is going out? And what is that surplus or deficit, right? Because at that point, now you have to make some decisions. Because at the end of the day, like the biggest killer of your success in general, but we'll just keep it to financial success, is entitlement, right? It's that I deserve, or I feel like I should be able to do this. What does your financial resources say that you can do, or that you should be doing, right? And if you don't have a surplus of money to allocate for just the basic emergencies or savings or whatever, that means that something has to change about your lifestyle and what you're spending, or about the amount of money that you're bringing in. But like, those are just the facts, right? Like we can't debate that. If it's costing you $3,000 a month, $4,000 a month to make existing lifestyle, right? And you're making that exact amount of money or less, and you're even having to subsidize with credit, like that's a recipe for disaster. So we have to become massively aware of what is actually happening so that we can make data-driven decisions about what must change. That's the first thing. And then from there, once we have that awareness, we have to take immediate action, right? It's like we can't, like, it's not enough to know. To know and not to do is not to know, right? So it's like, once we know, what are we going to do about it? Like, everybody's first fundamental objective is, if I'm at break even or if I'm in the red, I have to eliminate or change something, right? And once we do that, we gotta start to take that action so that we can have resources to allocate towards the lifestyle that we want. Because most people, they're so stuck in the life they have now. They're so stuck in the residual impact of bad decisions they made in the past, and they never spend any time on focusing on, well, what must be true today to build the life I want to build tomorrow? Because if you don't focus any time on that, you're always going to be dealing with the residual impact of your past decisions, and we don't want to be stuck in that, right? So asking yourself the tough questions on, like, if I want to have extra money, if I want to be able to travel, if I want to be able to invest, what must be true about my actions today to make that my reality, right? So I look at money in three very simple buckets, right? There's a lot of micro things you have to do, but on a macro level, it's about what you make, how you manage it, and how you maximize it, right? And I remember in the early days of financial advising, sometimes I would go through people's budgets and they would say, what do I need to cut? What do I need to cut? And sometimes what I realized, I was like, you actually don't need to cut much, right? You need to turn up the lever of the money that you make, right? Like, that's your greatest lever, right? It's much easier to make an extra $10,000 than it is to get your money to make you $10,000, right? Or produce $10,000. Not, when I say easier, I mean like you have more control in the short run to be able to make that happen, if that makes sense, right? So it's like, are there opportunities for me to become of more value to the world and to the marketplace that can give me more resources to maximize? Because sometimes it's like, it's not that you need to cut. Like, cutting expenses is a finite exercise, right? The least amount of money you can spend is zero. Now, you might not be happy with that lifestyle. You might be living on your mom's couch. You might be bumming off other people, but the lowest you can go is zero. But making more money is an infinite opportunity, right? And so you have to ask yourself, like, what can I do to make myself more valuable to the marketplace? so that I can have that disposable income to allocate towards investing, towards saving, et cetera. And then from there, if I'm being a good steward over it and I'm managing it appropriately, that will give me the opportunity to maximize it. That'll give me the opportunity to put money into vehicles where the money can do the working, so that at some point I don't have to do all the work, right? But they have to evaluate. Like, we hear these cliches all the time of you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been or you don't know where you are. Like, you have to know. Like, you can't be afraid of the boogeyman. What's your credit score? Do you owe anybody? Are some things delinquent? Like, just do an evaluation, right? Look at what's happening so you can make some informed decisions about where you are and what must be true for you to change your situation.
Okay, no, I really like that. I really like that framework. So, you know what, let's go deeper.
Yeah.
And I like what you mentioned about, like, first you need to kind of build the awareness piece of like where you're at. And the solution, it might be to cut expenses, or it might be that you actually just need to make more money.
Right.
But you know what, let's start right in the beginning. And I want to give this stat. So in 2023, they found that 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, right? So when you talk about having a surplus, most people are like dead.
Right on the line.
Yeah, right on the line. And so I want to go deeper, so this is really actionable for people. I open Excel or Google Sheets and I start, almost like itemizing the list. Like, I start writing out the expenses and what I'm bringing in. Even when you're working with clients, what is the next step after that? Like, how are you even figuring out, actually, like, your expenses are pretty good?
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming there's people that have different sort of problems. So how do I know if I need to cut more, or if it's actually just I'm not making enough money?
Yeah. It's really, you're looking at it, especially when you're trying to fix the problem, you got to look at things on a granular level and see how things are allocated, right? And if you're making $5,000 a month and you're spending, I don't know, $1,000 a month on between Uber Eats and groceries or whatever, right? You can start to just determine, like, there's some kind of baseline percentages that, like, and it's not universally true, because once you start making so much money, at some point you don't want to go by percentages, because now you're just allocating too much money towards certain buckets, right? But on a fundamental level, there's not many scenarios where a person's basic living expenses, like their fixed cost, right? Their house, their phone bill, et cetera, should exceed 50, maybe 60% of their total net income, right? And if we're seeing that you're above that, right, then it's like, okay, well, that's an indicator that we need to evaluate. But if we're seeing that you're above that, but it's simply because, oh man, like you're only spending $200 a month on groceries, but like you make $4,000, right? Now we're seeing that the issue is the income problem. So you can kind of like look at a balance of, well, how much money they're making relative to what's considered reasonable or normal, and how is that allocated relative to the expenses that they have. And you're kind of able to back into, is it I'm overspending, right? Or is it I'm not making enough, right? It's usually pretty glaringly evident, because most people, when they see it, they're in shock. It's like, oh, like, I didn't realize I was spending $700 a month on Amazon, right? That, like, the things tend to be kind of glaringly evident once you get clear. And then sometimes it's like, well, what else can I do? It's like, I mean, I'm only spending $200 a month on groceries. Like, there's really nothing else that I can do to cut if I don't have a surplus, even though I'm only spending X amount of dollars. And that's where you can kind of see where the opportunities are.
Yeah. You know what? I just want to make sure there's no gaps for people. Can you just explain the terms? So you mentioned fixed cost and then your total net income. For people that don't know, like, what does that mean? Like, what's involved in those?
Yep. So your fixed cost, and I'll break it down even further. So you have, when you think about your cash flow management, you have your fixed costs, what I like to call your 30-day money, right? Those are things that you already committed to. Those are past commitments. You already committed to the lease on the apartment. You already committed to the car payment, right? These are things that they are going to be what they are, so you probably want to know where that money's coming from. Those are your past commitments. Those are your fixed costs. Then you have variable cost, right, which are your present choices. And that's the area where you have the most opportunity, or the most opportunity for the wheels to come off, right? That's eating out, going out with friends, shopping, like all those things that there's no set amount that you have to spend on it, and you kind of have control over it. But if you don't have control over it, right, that's where things can get messy, right? So you have your variable cost, and I call that like your 7-day money and your present choices. And then, of course, you have your future commitments. And those are the things where it's like, oh, okay, I know I want to go on this trip this year. I know my MacBook is about to die. I've had it for 7 years. I need to save some money for that. Like those are the things where you know what you're planning for, and you want to allocate money proactively towards those things, right? And essentially after taxes, right, that is the actual money that you have to play with to allocate across these various buckets, right? So your total net income is going to be, well, look at my paycheck. This is the gross amount. I think they call it gross because it's disgusting what it looks like after taxes come out, right? But here's the gross amount. Let's say it's $6,500 a month, and then your net amount after taxes and whatever else you got coming out your check might be $4,300, right? That's the amount that you actually have to navigate and live your lifestyle on. Yeah.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And so it sounds from the way that you described it, if someone actually, the solution is they need to cut expenses, it's really those variable costs that it sounds like is where those cuts need to be.
For the most part, unless they are willing to go dramatic, right? Like if they realize like, oh, wow, I'm paying too much for my car payment. Let me see if there's a way to get out of this lease, right? Or, my rent is really high. Do I have a 2-bedroom? Can I get a roommate? Should I be putting on Airbnb? Like it really depends upon how extreme someone's willing to go. Obviously, certain things have contracts and terms, and you may not be able to just like snap your fingers and get out of it. But to your point, the variable expenses are the ones you have the most control over in the short run, right? Because if you notice that you're spending $1,000 on food and Uber Eats, you can reel that in, pretty quickly.
Yeah. You know what? We were having a conversation with 19 Keys a couple of weeks ago. Something that he mentioned, which I thought was really relevant, and I haven't heard it before. I haven't thought about it before. He spoke about financial trauma. I think when we hear the word trauma, we think a lot more about, I don't know, maybe like an emotional or relationship or something that you saw growing up.
Yeah.
We don't think about financial trauma.
Right.
And so even what we just discussed, it's kind of like the practical things that you can do, right? Like you can list out your expenses, you can start to make these cuts, but then people will get in this situation where it's like the routines, the budget, it's not sticking. Like they can't stick to it.
Yeah.
It just stops. Oh, I need to get back on this thing. I need to do this again.
Right.
It feels to me more like financial trauma. And that's actually more of a mindset thing that has to be kind of unpicked, unlocked. Can you talk about that? Like, how can someone even become aware and then start to work through financial trauma?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I got a good friend of mine, Rakim Sabri, who really leans into this topic of financial trauma. But from my vantage point, I think there's a quantitative lens of personal finance, and that's like, what's going in versus what's coming out, right? And then there's the qualitative lens, right? And the qualitative lens is where I feel like there's a lot of area of opportunity related to the behavior of why you do things, right? So what I mean by that is when you think about money, right? Like you can ask yourself a question to determine if your money is aligned with your values, right? Like, does my spending align with what I say I value? But the aha moment that should come from that is you have to understand what you value, right? And your values, a lot of times, sometimes are inherited, right? Or passed down or based upon what you see if you haven't really dug into what you value. And so for me, I always take my clients through this exercise, this qualitative exercise of making sure that people are clear on what they say they value, right? Because I should be able to look at your bank account and see a reflection of what you say you value based upon the way you spend your money. And that in and of itself is going to potentially reveal some trauma. So for example, if we look in your bank account and we see a bunch of expenses on shopping or just these discretionary things that don't necessarily align with, you said that you cared about freedom, or you said you cared about travel or cared about being able to help your loved ones. But when I look at your bank account, I see 3 trips to the mall, a trip to the Louis store. Help me understand, right? So then you have to continue to unpack. Well, what is that? Well, do I have a sense of, do I feel like I need to be valid? I need external validation to feel my self-worth. Like, why am I spending money on things that don't align with what I think I told myself I value, right? So it forces you to dig deeper, because we can look on a transaction level and say, you said that you don't have any money to save or you don't have any extra money, but I just can identify areas in your spending that could have been allocated towards something that you said you cared about. Talk to me about why there's not alignment between those things, right? And you just keep asking why. You keep going deeper, and what you'll find through that exercise is that financial trauma, right? But you have to face it head on and really make sure that it's like, okay, well, if I'm saying that I value this, but I can't see where that's reflected in my spending habits, there must be something more here, right? And I need to do the work to unpack that, right? It goes back to that self-sabotage. What I realized about self-sabotage is like, it's kind of like this idea, well, I'll even frame it this way. I call it the internal identity index, right? Your life can only elevate, right, relative to the level of alignment of your internal beliefs, right? Like your external output is never going to exceed the level of your internal beliefs. And if we don't figure out what those are, you're always going to be limited on the output because there's no alignment there, right? So it's like, I said I wanted to achieve this. I said I wanted to do this. I said I wanted to do that, right? That's what I said. But why is it that my actions and my output aren't reflective of that? It's because there's a gap in your beliefs, right? And as a result, it's not allowing you to produce the external outcome that you want. Anybody can say, I want to make $1 million. I want to have $100,000 saved. Anybody can say that. But if there's not alignment between your actions and your words and your thoughts, it's never going to happen, right? And so we got to dig into like, why is it that I'm saying these things that I believe that I want, but somehow my actions or my behaviors aren't aligning to that? Let me keep digging deeper. Let me ask myself that question. What did I see growing up, right? Like maybe I had this mindset of, I believe, here's a common one. I don't believe that this is going to last, so YOLO. Right? Like I might as well live it up because this is too good to be true. And at some point, someone or something is coming to take it from me, but at least I can say that I enjoyed it while I had it. So there's no point to save it. There's no point to save for a rainy day. Like this isn't going to last. Let me live it up while I have it. So you got to unpack, well, why is that belief? Why do you have that belief? What did you see or what did you witness that leads you to believe that something is inherently going to disrupt this journey that you're on? Right. It's going to be different for everybody, but that's kind of just an example of the journey that people have to go through to really ask themselves those questions of like, why did I do that? Right. I knew that inherently that wasn't the best thing to do with my money, but I did it anyway. Why? And keep asking yourself those questions until you get an answer.
Yeah, I think that's so good. Your external results can only rise to the level of your internal beliefs. And it's interesting because so much when we don't have something, we're not making enough money, or our relationship isn't in the way we want it, or just my lifestyle isn't where I want it to be, we're always looking outward. Very rarely do we look inward. Mm-hmm. I'm curious for you to reflect even in your own journey.
Yeah.
Your external results can only rise to the level of your internal beliefs. When I even say that, is there a point in your life when, I don't know, it kind of just hit you square in the face that the reason that you haven't ascended to this level that you want to be at is some sort of misalignment in the internal beliefs?
Right.
Does something come to mind for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I probably would have to say definitely entrepreneurial related. Like I was seeing people, make a lot of money in their business and I was still trying to figure it out. And I think I heard this because I didn't have it as articulated as well as I do now then when I got slapped in the face with it. But someone has said, like, if someone was following you around with the camera 24/7 and you think about the projection, the way you project yourself to the world, what you post on social media, what you tell other people about you, would what they see behind the scenes be in alignment with what they would expect based upon the projection that you forecast, right? And it really forced me to think about like how I spent my time, what I was doing with my time. Was I truly being as intentional as I could relative to what external outcome that I said I wanted? And I was like, man, like there's some moments where I wouldn't want the camera to see that I hit the snooze button. Or there would be some moments where I wouldn't want the camera to see that like I cheated myself on that rep in the gym. Or there'd be some moments where it was in the middle of the day and I probably could have been doing some money making activities and I didn't want to face whatever I really did. So I created a distraction to avoid the real work, right? And it just slapped me in the face. I was like, man, like that means that I'm not in full alignment with who I project to the world, right? And it's not to say that you have to be like perfect. It's not about perfection, but it's having the awareness of like, so that you can course correct and you can self-correct in those moments. But that framework, so less of a specific situation, but that framework caused me to really evaluate everything that I was doing, right? Like you're the only person who's heard 100% of the lies that you told yourself. You're the only person, right? Like when you said you're gonna work out at 6 a.m. and you didn't go, right? When you said that this week I'm not gonna eat the sweets, or this month I'm not gonna spend, like, there's so many people that will never know that you committed to that and didn't fulfill it, right? But you know, and that has to be enough, because at the end of the day, you're the one that's gonna benefit most from the life that you're trying to curate, right? And so for me, like being able to have that self-talk to remind myself, like at the end of the day, yes, there's a lot of work that I got to put in to achieve the life that I want, but ultimately I get to benefit the most from that, right? And so I can't say that I want this thing or I want this life and I'm not willing to do the actions. Like a tree grows in two directions at the same time. You have the fruit system and you have the root system, right? It's like we always focus on the fruit. We're always thinking about what if this happens, all of the fruit that it can bear, all of the apples that are going to come from the tree. No one's thinking about, well, I got to go against gravity. I got to dig twice as deep to create this foundation that can even support the fruit that I'm trying to grow. That background work, that deep, dark work that nobody else sees. We only tend to think about the external results, right? And so when you sit down and be like, man, like, do I really want this whole thing, or did I just want the fruit, but I didn't realize like what it would take to bear the fruit, right? So having a better understanding of like the external result that I say I want, well, what is the work required, right? What are the seeds that must be sown to produce it? And am I willing to do it? And it's okay to come to a realization of like, oh, now that I understand this is what it takes, maybe I don't want as much of it as I thought. Like some people, like I think David Shands, he says, I don't want to become a billionaire. Right. And he's like, and the reason why he says that is because when he weighs the pros and cons of the lifestyle balance and alignment that he wants with his family and what he believes it would take to achieve that, as he understands the root system, he understands there's certain things that he wouldn't be willing to do or want to do because of the sacrifice that it would take to get it. And I think sometimes we just don't know enough about the depth or the gravity of what it takes to achieve what we want. So we're not like maliciously or intentionally just pursuing the fruit. We just didn't know. We didn't sit down when we mapped out this vision to say, all right, here's the things that I want. And we didn't think about the things that we had to do. Or maybe we didn't know all the things we have to do. And as a result, when life is revealing it to you, are you leaning into it and embracing it? Or are you like, oh, no, I didn't sign up for that. I don't want to do that. Right. And that's that, those quiet moments where you got to sit with yourself and ask yourself, like, do I want this as bad as I thought I did?
Yeah. No, you have to do the work that's required. On that line of thinking, I think about that stat I read earlier on. 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone's listening, they're in that 78%, and they want to get to the point, basically what you mentioned earlier, have optionality.
Yeah.
They have like choices.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my mom just got laid off from her job. I'm gonna retire my mom.
Yeah.
Or, you know what? I feel like I need a bit of a break, like I'm burning out. They can make certain choices with even their work, their lifestyle, so they can take a break for a few months. They're not constantly against the clock. There's not someone always on them like, nah, you have to get up and go again because your situation determines that you have to do that. So when you say that you have to do the actions required to get to that stage, and I love asking someone like you this question because you see people that have gone from the point where they were like just making ends meet to the reality where they have the optionality. So give it to me in more detail. What are the steps that are required? Like what is the work that people are not doing, but it's pivotal so that they can get to that point?
Yeah. So I'll dig deeper on those three levers, right? So the first one is like, when I think about the resources that I have and where they're coming from, your job, your business or whatever, like do an evaluation on, am I in the right opportunity vehicle? right? Like, am I making enough money from what I'm doing? Because if you're not, then everything else is going to be harder, right? Like, it doesn't matter how much you budget or how much you invest. If you invest $100 and you get 100% return on a consistent basis, which is not heard of, that's still only $200, right? But why can you only invest 100? Because you're not making enough, right? Or maybe you're not managing it right. So the first thing is, am I in the right opportunity vehicle with the way in which I'm making money, right? And evaluate, is there ways to, if not, like, am I willing to develop new skills so that I can change it, right? Because you got to come face to face with it. Like, again, to know is not enough. Like, so if I'm not in the right opportunity vehicle, am I willing to acquire new skills to change that narrative? Or if I am, what can I do to maximize it, right? Like, what is my career trajectory so that I can increase this lever to give myself more resources? In the process of figuring that out or striving for that, let me make sure that the filtration system where these new resources are going to go, that I don't have a hole in my bucket. Because we've all seen, people who've made all the money in the world. So we know that money making in and of itself is not the answer, because we've seen people who've made millions of dollars and they've gone bankrupt, right? So let me make sure that I have a bucket that doesn't have a hole in it, right? Let me evaluate my cat. Let me come face to face to see if my behaviors align with what I say I want, right? When I look at my transactions, am I seeing too many transactions for brunch or Uber Eats or online shopping? Like, is that disproportionately out of alignment relative to what I say I want, right? People will tell me, I ask people about this question all the time. How many trips do you have planned this year? Oh, I plan to go here, there. Oh, okay, great. How much time have you spent planning out your finances, right? People will spend more time planning out temporary escapes than they will planning out a permanent one, right? So we have money to travel, again, but it goes back to entitlement. It goes back to these thoughts of, oh, you only live once. Like, I understand that. Like, that can happen within reason, but we can't say that we don't have the money for it, because you just told me that you had 3 international trips planned this year. And I know you're not spending no less than $3,000-$4,000 per trip, right? So it's not that you don't have it, it's that it doesn't seem like a big enough priority right now. Or going back to the financial trauma, I have to do this to get this temporary escape from the life that I have right now. Well, then let's back up. Well, why do you feel the need to escape from the life you have right now? What are you doing professionally that has you feeling so bad about it that we have to spend money that could be going towards a permanent escape, right? Just to get the mental space and break, to come up for air, to go back to your analogy about feeling like I'm underwater, to be able to keep going, right? It's like, you want to spend your whole life being in the middle of the ocean, doggy paddling, right? You're not going anywhere. You don't ever make it to the shore. Let's say the shore is retirement or freedom, but you're in the middle of the ocean, just like doggy paddling, right? Your head's above water. You're surviving. You're existing, right? But you're not really making progress. And that's what a lot of people do when they fund these temporary escapes or these temporary vices or these things that are going to give them temporary relief to address the symptom versus addressing the actual problem. So we got to look at, okay, cool. Is my bucket, right? The where the money is going once I make it, does it not have a hole in it? Am I crystal clear on where every dollar is going, what it's doing, right? If you ask somebody right now how much money they make per month, most people can answer. Most people, I make blah, blah, blah. Or maybe entrepreneurs can, because sometimes it varies. But most people, they can answer you. How much do you spend every month to the dollar? Almost nobody can answer that. Nobody knows. Why is that, right? So we have to get that answer, because that is going to give us an understanding. Because if we already know how much we make, if we know to the dollar how much we're spending, then we know how much we have available to purchase our freedom, right? And the last thing from there is then you'll be able to start maximizing your resources and investing in assets like the stock market, real estate, businesses that you can have an ownership stake in but not have to run, that can then grow independently of your efforts of working for the money, so that now the money can start working for you. But those are like the 3 macro steps that a person will have to take in order to get that freedom.
So it seems like the order of operations is like kind of the step 1 is what you said is the evaluation. Mm-hmm. So you need to do kind of, you need to have the self-awareness and do the work of like planning out, like how much am I spending, right, how much is coming in, the fixed cost, all this stuff that you mentioned, the variable cost, all of that. From there, it's like you also start to get into the mindsets and beliefs part of it, which is like fixing the financial trauma. Yep. I also think in that evaluation, it will be kind of obvious am I just spending too much, or do I just need to be bringing more in?
Right.
It's basically what you were saying. Is like, is the bucket just leaky,
Yeah.
or is there just not enough water in it to begin with?
100%. Yep.
And then from there, it's like, okay, so if it's I already have the money, then it's like, how do I deploy it so that I get more from my money?
Right.
And if it's that I need to make cuts or I need to be more aware of where I'm spending, then I can also make those adjustments there.
Right.
One of the things, actually, because we hear a lot about like budgeting, you know, like, do you need a budget? I'm curious what this looks like on like a day-to-day basis for people. Like, should I literally be in my accounts every day, like looking at each transaction? Like, what does it mean when people even say, oh, you need to know how much is going out? Like, how specific is that? Because I think to a lot of people, it feels like
daunting,
to be there. Like, every single transaction is written down, or I need to follow this like strict budget every month.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say if you are a person who identifies that you have a hole in your bucket, right? You have to watch it more closely in the beginning. And I would say it has to be intentional until it becomes intuitive. And the reason why I use the macros of money framework of make, manage, and maximize is very similar to like dietary macros, right? There's hundreds of micronutrients, right? But if you can just get the fats, the carbs, the protein, if you can dial that in, right, like you'll probably be okay, right? And so I akin that into the personal finance world as well. If you can have an understanding of your opportunity vehicle and you feel like you're doing your best to max it out or continue to elevate there, and you're managing those resources appropriately, and as a result, because of your good management, now you have excess resources to maximize, right? If you can get those three things right, you're in a good space. So when it comes to how much time I need to spend on budgeting, I'd say no less than once a week, maybe on a Sunday or Monday, whatever you consider to be the start of your week, right? You need to say, okay, well, what was my target this week? Like I knew, like within a 7-day range, you should know what's happening. All right, this week is the first week of the month. Got my rent. I'm allocating, $200 towards all eating out and grocery. Like you should be able to set a target for that week, and then don't check it every day, but by Sunday, right? Let me evaluate like the trend, because at least if you do it on a weekly basis, you get a chance to recalibrate before the month is up. Because what you don't want to happen is another month goes by and it's like, oh shoot, I blew my budget again, right? So I say once a week, have a money date, either with yourself, if you're the only person responsible for your finances, or your significant other or your partner, and just see, okay, relative to what I said the goal was this week, how did I trend? Did I hit the target? Did I miss the target? Did I exceed expectations? And then because it happens, since it only happened 7 days ago, you can actually remember like what happened, right? Like versus it being like the end of the month, like I don't even remember. I was out that night, I had one too many drinks, and then I went to go get pizza afterwards. Like if it was within 7 days, you can actually reflect and be like, oh, okay, which makes it easier to course correct, right? So I say once a week at minimum, even me to this day, I still do it, right? So I have a chance to recalibrate. I look at it like sports, right? Everybody goes into the game thinking they're going to win. No one goes into the game like, ooh, man, we're probably going to lose this one. They go into the game thinking they're going to win. You go into the month hoping that things go well with your money, but something happens, right? And then what happens at halftime if a team is behind? They go into the locker room and make halftime adjustments, right? And so this is that version of like, okay, well, every 7 days, we're going to take a quick glance. It's not going to be that many transactions, hopefully. It's only been a week. How did things go, right? And then also understanding that when you get to a point where you are managing your money well, you can zoom out and it be more on a macro level. What I mean by that is look at total money in versus total money out. I don't care if you spent $200 on groceries and $300 on shopping if you didn't spend more than the total allotted money for the amount of expenses that you had that month. So then you can kind of play around with this. Like, oh, I got friends coming in town the third week of the month. I'm going to be more diligent the first 2 weeks. I'm not going to really eat out or go out that much so that I don't have to feel constrained when my friends come in town, right? Budgeting is not to restrict you from spending. It's to tell your money where it's supposed to go so you don't have to wonder where it went, right? It's like, I want to do it. This is the amount of resources I have. This is what I want to do with my money. Okay, now that I know that, what must be true in order for me to do more of that? I don't want to be the friend that says, oh, I can't go out to that amazing rooftop restaurant in New York when you come to town. So am I willing to cut back the first 2 weeks on other stuff to be able to do what I want. It's just like reallocating your money towards what you want most. And that's why I said the qualitative element has to come into play, because like, what do you value? I really do value that weekly fellowship when I get up with my friends and we can do X, Y, and Z. Oh, I really value that. Like, great. Now, how can we align your spending with your values so that your money doesn't get nickeled and dimed on things that seem convenient in the moment, but are robbing you from leveraging your money to use it for the areas that really would make you the most fulfilled?
Yeah. You know, I really like that reframe on even what budgeting is. Because I think when we think budget, and I know this for me personally, it just feels like something to limit you. Like, oh, great, now I have to do this thing, like back to the budget.
Right.
Like, it's just the perception of it is like, this is a negative thing.
Right.
But what if it was the budget is actually just making sure you're in alignment? That's the key. Is there's this ideal reality, this vision that you have for your life. The budget is just holding you honest, like it's just steering the ship
It's the
towards the
roadmap.
vision.
100%.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
It's like discipline really is freedom. But I think, but people focus on the wrong things. Like whenever someone, you think about a budget or even like a nutrition plan, the first thought that goes in everybody's mind is what they're giving up, right? What they're losing, right? But is it really a loss, or is it a liberation, right? To be able to free you up to the thing you want most, right? Most people focus on what they have to give up versus what they're gaining. So, but it's not an organic thought process, right? So you have to intentionally insert that thought process when you're going through the budgeting process of like, I'm doing this because, right? Man, by doing this, I'm going to be worry-free on that amazing international trip that I'm taking with my friends in a few months, because I didn't nickel and dime myself locally on things that, you know, I could have controlled, right? You got to talk to yourself until it becomes intuitive, right? Like you got to remind yourself, what am I gaining by doing this? Like, and for whatever reason, it's not intuitive, but everyone focuses on what they're giving up, the restriction, right? Because they feel like it's, oh man, this is too many guardrails, and they're not putting enough focus on what am I gaining. But I think that's also because like we're only really motivated by two things at the end of the day. We're motivated to avoid pleasure and to seek pain, right? And if the pain is future pain, right, i.e., oh shoot, if I don't invest money for the future, I'm gonna have to work and hustle my whole life. When it seems far away, it's hard to make present decisions to adjust it, right? So we got to bring that future pain into the present, not to like motivate me to, oh my gosh, I need to have a scare tactic to be better with my money, but to like understand that if I don't do what I'm supposed to do, is that a life that I want 5-10 years from now, right? Does George want to be the dad that my son is like, man, well, my dad, he's always working, he's never around, because I didn't do what I was supposed to do to give myself that optionality? If that's not something that I want for myself, what must be true about my actions today to pay it forward to my future self, right? But that's very hard for people to do. We're worried about what's right in front of us, right? But again, if you can just focus on what you're gaining from this budget, from this cash flow plan, and let that be at the forefront, I think it makes it a lot more palatable. One thing that comes to mind for me, I heard this analogy a long time ago when I was first getting into entrepreneurship. A lady was at a conference and she said, in 2011, 1 billion drill bits were sold. And for those of you who are not handy, a drill bit is the thing that you put inside of an electric drill, right? And she said, let's assume that those drill bits were used to hang artwork in office parks and residential homes all across the country. She said, nobody cares about the drill bits, right? No one cares about the artwork. What they care about is the feeling that they get when they walk in the room where the artwork is hung. And that's the same thing with money. Like no one cares about the fact that you have $100,000 in your bank account. No one cares about if it's in what financial vehicle it's in, whether it's a Roth IRA, whatever the case may be. What you should care about is the lifestyle and the things that you want to do with those resources. And when you can paint that picture, right, that's what creates the habits of like, well, this is why I don't care about having the money. I don't care about the account that it's in, right? I'm not going to just stare at my $1 million in my bank account. There's a life that I want. And this just happens to be the fuel that allows me to get there, right? Money is like gas on a road trip. We're not going on a tour of gas stations, right? We just need the fuel to get where we're going, right? So when you can understand clearly where it is you want to go, what that looks like, that can help you make better decisions about what you do with the fuel. Cause like, well, shoot, I'm not gonna have enough to get to this destination if I use it recklessly, right? So that's the frame that I try to help my clients understand.
Yeah, I remember we had a guest that came in. He said that people are motivated by two things fundamentally. It's either deep inspiration or it's deep pain. It's fear. And it's like, it's either desperation or it's inspiration. It's like one of those two things when you really take the motivations down to its root. No, I think that's such a good point. You speak about the topic of like making more money. So let's assume now that someone's got they're self-aware, they know where they're trying to go, their budget is like in lockstep, like they're acting the right way according to this budget. But it's still just the case that they need to make more money.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that part of it because, and I heard you say this, you said, I believe on Twitter, there are several jobs that you can earn multiple six figures from and make more than most entrepreneurs with less stress. So unless you hate your job or it's impacting your mental health, or you have the desire and grit to build something meaningful, leverage your job and build wealth. And so I'm curious to dig a bit deeper into that. For the person that's like, because I think we so often we hear these stories of like, I just quit my job, and like the entrepreneur, I think it's very romanticized and eulogized.
Sure.
But for most people, the solution is like, the job is actually kind of cool.
Yeah.
I just need to get more from it.
Right.
And so when you're speaking with clients like that, like they already have a job and they're like, they just want to get more from it. They want to leverage it in the way that you said. What does that look like?
Yeah. So for me, what that looks like is when you look at the industry that you work in, there's going to be very small startups who are just getting off the ground, probably can afford to pay you more, might even paying you less than you're making right now. You have really big behemoths that are really well established. And you're probably just a cog in a wheel in the grand scheme of things, right? But then you have kind of companies that are a sweet spot in the middle where they're big enough to hire pretty decent talent, but they know they're competing with the bigger companies for the top talent. So they have to incentivize people to work with them, right? That incentive may come in the form of equity compensation, right? I'm willing to give you a bigger piece of the pie. And as the company does well, as you come in and be a rock star and help us build this thing, you actually get the benefit from the upside. Because in most cases, you don't. You go to work, right? You get your job, maybe you get your 2% raise. The company reports these record earnings, and you're just like, well, that's cool for the company, but it didn't mean anything for me. But if you get a company that's like, we're established, but we have so much room to grow, and we know we need top talent to grow, we're willing to benefit you. We're willing to give you equity, right? Which will be mutually beneficial because as you grow, we grow. I think that is a cheat code to getting more out of your job, right? My sister, for example, she worked for a tech company before she retired last year at 40. And the reason why she was able to retire sooner, outside of having a brother that's a financial advisor, is that the company gave her a substantial amount of equity, right? So she was able to cash out on that equity to be able to live her life. So I think that's key, is finding companies who are willing to give you more than just the base compensation, more than just a standard bonus, and willing to give you a piece of the pie. And it's a win-win for you and the company because now you're incentivized for the company to do well. You're not in a 9-to-5 environment where you're just like, let me just clock in, let me just clock out, I'm here so I don't get fined. Like you actually know and can tangibly feel the benefit of the company winning at scale. So I think that's something that people can take advantage of. You typically see that most commonly with tech companies, right? And they don't have to all be big behemoths like Meta or things of that nature, but there are companies just seeking out opportunities where the company is willing to give you equity, I think is a cheat code to leveraging your job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess it would be, because I'm assuming, I don't know this, but I'm assuming if you're working at like Google, they're probably not going to give you, actually, they do give like options and stuff.
Yeah, they give, I mean, you're just going to get more if the company is like on the brink. Like when Google probably was like, like 10, 15 years ago, right? They're like, we got to hire this top talent from Microsoft or whoever else. It's like, we got to incentivize these people to even trust that we're going to be around. Like they should leave this well-established company to come work for us, right? So yeah, the big companies, they still give some, but it's just not probably going to be as substantial and meaningful as a company that's like on the come up.
And it makes sense because it's almost like pairing. I guess the thing with entrepreneurship is that you have the high upside, right? So it's like you have all of the risk, but there's also this really high upside if it goes well that you'll benefit.
Right.
I guess with a job, it's like they kind of cap the downside. Like you're not holding the bag for everything.
Right.
But then they also, most jobs cap the upside significantly as well.
Right.
Which is like if you really overperform, the company gets all of that benefit, not really you. But obviously if you're getting options or you have some equity, you're seeing some of that benefit.
Big facts.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. I guess, and actually, I want to read out something that because you mentioned your sister, and when we spoke a couple months ago, this is what you said about her. You said, "My sister's 40 years old. She retired last year. She's one of my first clients, and she had a regular job, corporate America, no real entrepreneurial passions or endeavors. And on her 40th birthday, she made the decision that she was ready to retire. And she has millions of dollars that she was able to accumulate through the strategies that I taught her." So I thought that was pretty cool. I'm curious, like, with any of these clients that you've worked with, if we spoke about, they obviously come to you and they're at a certain point, and then by the time that, like, in the end where they're ready to retire, or they've just gotten the outcome that they wanted.
Right.
Whether that's the optionality, whether that's they don't need to work anymore, or they can choose to work. What is like the time frame on that? Like if someone was to execute every part of what we've discussed perfectly, the self-awareness piece, the budgeting, making more money at their job, getting equity, what is the time frame where I could actually, like, what is it? It's like a year, 2 years, like what am I looking at?
Yeah, I think there's levels of it, right? There's like, the first level is, man, I don't feel like I'm just keeping my head above water. The things that I want to do in my day-to-day life, like I can handle it. I'm enjoying my life even though I'm still working. I think in 365 days for the average person with commitment, they can start to turn that around in a year or two, right? I think for the person who wants to be completely financially independent, I'd say give or take 6 to 8 years. Time frame of like, man, I'm like legit, like my investments can completely cover my lifestyle and working is truly optional. I'd say give or take 6 to 8 years. Obviously there's levers that can make it more or less, right? Depending upon how much money you allocate to investing, how much money you make, and those things. But by and large, within a 6 to 8 year window is possible. And the reason why it's possible within that time frame, which is a lot faster than most people would imagine, because most people think about retirement, they're thinking like, man, I gotta wait till I'm 65 years old, is the way in which we approach it, right? Like most people approach retirement from the vantage point of accumulation, right? I need to have this large pool of money accumulated that I want to look at one day. It's like, oh man, that's so much money. I'm swimming in the money, right? But again, money's a tool, and it's not a pool, right? It's a tool, and so like the money needs to be used. It needs to be in motion, and so the way we're able to accelerate our clients' financial independence timeline is that when they start investing, right? The first thing, so let's say they start investing in the stock market, we're already looking at how we can leverage that money for another investment. So most people, they're just investing one time and hoping that over the next 10, 15, 20 years, it accumulates into that nest egg. What we're saying is, all right, let's invest the money in the stock market, right? That's a great bank account alternative, meaning that your bank is going to pay you 1% to keep the money there. If that, the stock market on average, on a very just average account is going to pay you 10%, right? You're going to earn 10% as your money appreciates. But how could we leverage that account to go buy other assets that maybe produce cash flow today? So what most people don't realize is when you invest money into a brokerage account, most institutions will give you the ability to borrow against the value of the account. So if you have an investment account that has $100,000, you probably could borrow up to $50,000 based upon the value of the account, right? So what does that mean? That means that your $100,000 is still growing, right? While you've gotten access to a line of credit based upon the collateral that you have for $50,000. Most people, when they get credit, just regular credit, they take that money and they do what? They go buy stuff, liabilities, they travel, whatever. We take that line of credit and we didn't go buy other assets. Maybe now we're putting that as a down payment on a rental property, right? That's going to produce cash flow. Now you have two investments off of the original investment, right? You take that cash flow and you reinvest that back into the portfolio, right? And now you continue to build up that nest egg to be able to continue to run that strategy for other investments. So now because of that, you're able to get 2 to 3 uses out of the same dollar, whereas the average person is only investing that money one time. So when I say things like we're helping people achieve financial freedom 3 times faster, it's not because it's like a catchy tagline. It's like, well, it's just the math, right? Of we're leveraging $1 3 ways. While it's growing in the investment account, we're borrowing against it to buy another property. Now that property is appreciating and producing cash flow, and then that cash flow goes back into the investment and is now getting the return of the original investment as well. So that's how we're able to kind of condense and accelerate the timeline.
Yeah, because it's compounding. It's like you're doubling down on your efforts.
Right.
I think to what we were saying earlier, it's like the money is working for you. When you explain that process of like you're borrowing against the investment account that you have to then get another asset that's making you money, that's cash flowing. It's like the money's working for you. I think it's such an important theme of the episode. Is like, and I love that you stress this, which is first of all, like having the vision of like, what is your life going to be?
Right.
And then planning against that. Because I think so often it's like people start with the advice of, oh, you need to cut expenses and all this stuff. It's like, that's not actually what matters.
Right.
It's in service of the vision of like where you're trying to go. And I think a lot of the times it's like we're missing step one. We don't even have the vision. We don't have the self-awareness of where we're trying to go. That's
the only thing that's going to keep you going, right? Like saving money and investing money, like that's the smart young adult or a thing to do. Like we're supposed to be good stewards over our money. Like that's only going to get you so far. It's even like working out. It's like, I want to look good on the beach. Well, what happens in the wintertime, right? So it's like, there has to be a bigger why, a bigger reason. And that has to be at the forefront because that's what's going to drive the tactics, right? Because again, it seems like the things that we want most in life, right? Like they're difficult, right? Like there's difficulty to pursue that. And I think it's by design, but it's like, what's going to keep you motivated to do them is not the fact that you're going to enjoy the tactics. It's that you are so focused on the vision and the outcome. And these are just ingredients in the recipe. If I handed you a stick of butter and said, hey, take a bite out of this, you'd be like, first and foremost, no, but that's disgusting. Well, hey, here's a bag of flour. Take a spoonful of that. No, why would I do that, right? Take some baking powder. Eat that independently. Like the ingredients almost independently are never going to taste good. When you put them together, the total summation of your life and all the experiences, all the things you must do, eventually it comes out to be a cake with frosting and sprinkles, and that tastes good, right? So that's what we want to focus on. We want to focus on what is that outcome that I'm pursuing. I'm not looking at these isolated actions or circumstances or things that I have to do to make that happen. I just understand that these are what's required for the outcome. Because I think sometimes we focus on the micro details of like, this isn't fun, this is not enjoyable, not realizing it's an ingredient in the bigger recipe of what we actually want most.
Yeah. You know what? Here's where I wanna end. We spoke about like your early context. Spoke about the story of like, you know, unwrapping what you thought was a PlayStation. It wasn't a PlayStation.
Yeah.
Even like seeing your mom like unemployed or like having to move homes because of it or use a car, like just that whole frustration around a loss of independence, not being able to control the outcomes in your own life. And it feels to me, you know, like even when you walk into this room, and even Carter was here and whatever, just for people like behind the scenes, your life's in a very different place now. But I'm curious if the George that's here now had to speak with that younger version, maybe the one that was watching like his mom kind of struggle with stuff.
Yeah.
And in those moments where you were like the most disillusioned, like you were the most frustrated, you felt just unable to do what you wanted to do.
Right.
I'm curious, what would the George now, what advice would he give that version of George?
I would say that when money is not an option, people will typically choose art. Everybody's an artist until the rent's due, right? And what I mean by that is I think much of life is to pursue things that make your heart sing, right? Like you're building an amazing podcast platform. We talked a little bit offline about your intention to just have the best guest and make it amazing, right? Like, and I look at it as a form of art, right? Like I don't necessarily look at it directly as, I know it is a business, but I look at it like you have that feeling because there's a bigger why that's pulling you. Like, yes, it will yield a great financial outcome when it's all said and done, but that's not the core of like what you're building. There's an integrity associated with it. There's a vision that you have for what you're building, and that's what's driving you. At least I believe that's my assumption, right? And so what I would tell that younger George is paint the picture for the life that you want, the man that you want to become. And remember that any source of money that you run into should be in service of getting there. Anything that you do that's out of alignment is going to slow your ability down to get there. Like a lot of times when I give young professionals advice now, I'm like, don't be in such a hurry to grow up and be like put your big boy pants on. What I mean by that is like you're in college, you're about to graduate, and you see someone with the high rise apartment or the new car or that, like, that's cool. But the challenge is the more of your financial resource you have to use to prop up the aesthetic external lifestyle that most likely you're doing for external validation, the less resources you're going to have and the less freedom that you're going to have to become the version of you that you actually want to become. And so I would just encourage him to have that perspective, to not be influenced by the material possessions that people are buying to pacify the reality that they're actually not fulfilling the life that they want to live, and stay steadfast to who you know you want to become. And that will provide you way more joy, way more freedom, way more fulfillment, and it will yield the financial result that you're looking for, because when you do something that you enjoy, you're inherently going to do more of it. When you do more of it, you're just inherently going to get better at it. When you get better at it, you'll become one of the best, and when you become one of the best, it's impossible to be ignored, and you will get paid. That's what I would tell young George.
I love it. This is a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you for having me, brother.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. It's really a dream for me that I get to do this. It's surreal that this is what I do full time and every week. So if you enjoy the content, if you enjoyed the conversation, the stories, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us immeasurably with growing the channel, with getting guests, all of those things. So please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.